Welcome, welcome. It's Friday. It's time for MSP Confidential, and it's going to be a spicy one. I pinged my good friend Kyle Christensen earlier this week because every week he's been putting out these spicy Monday posts, and they catch my attention every single time. There's always some interesting layer of like, damn, he's right about that, and it's an interesting introspective thought experiment every single time to kind of read through his long-winded posts occasionally and try to make sense of what he's talking about and what can I do to work on that issue or that problem that I know we have. And so, Kyle, dude, it's so great to have you. I always enjoy our conversations because you're so thoughtful in your responses. And so, welcome to the live stream. It's the first time I have you to myself because the last time we were here with the other disorderly folks from Empath.
Yeah, and I think we all like to talk a lot, so it's a fun let's all talk over each other thing, which I'm sure you've experienced in in MSP Confidential of how do you corral more than one guest.
Right.
Um,
I
but
think, yeah, it's tough. And that particular episode with Alex also at the airport at the time, and the distraction of people walking by and having a sneak at the screen, all those fun little things makes it for a challenging environment for sure.
so I want to comment on one something real quick because you talk about introspection, but I think you're the king of it a little bit. And I got to say, the production quality that you have figured out is top notch. And one of the questions I have for you, just to start off, because I've experienced this in running a few different streams for MSPs, like Service Manager, Cohort, Elephant in the Room, all that stuff. Do you find yourself sometimes getting distracted in all the production, and you find yourself not listening or just disengaged because you're worried about the buttons
Hmm.
on your stream deck?
It's definitely been an evolution. I even go back to some of the first videos we did because we're about to hit the 1 year mark of being live with this stream, which is really cool. That in itself was sort of one of the objectives of setting out on the goal of doing this was like, can I keep it going long enough and not lose my mind? But so definitely in the beginning, there was a lot of trial and error around the production, how to do the switching, how to do the guests. And I did find myself often quite distracted by the buttons, how to transition, the notes on the screen, the thing, the other. And ironically, like I've never been too much about like preparation before these conversations. I do like when they are a little bit off the cuff and just more genuine and organic that way. But getting distracted by technical things absolutely takes your mind off the whole like arch of the conversation and makes it really difficult to have an intelligent follow through or follow up on the discussion. And so I have definitely figured or realized that as time kind of went on, I was more and more curious about the actual conversation and spending more time trying to be specifically active listening, I guess is the best way I can describe it. Um, it's certainly, I feel like it was a learned habit, learned trait. I think we all like to think we're good active listeners, but man, I'll tell you from the days of running an MSP, I can't remember a single time that thinking back introspectively and honestly, that I was in a boardroom with a client where I wasn't just waiting for my turn to talk. And, we were talking backstage about how there's probably a bunch of sayings about that. People just kind of waiting for their chance at spewing off.
Yeah, I was actually just on I still coach a few MSPs every year. I was just on a call with one where I gave him this adage where I used to write on all my pieces of paper, wait, WAIT, why am I talking?
Hmm.
Because I needed something to be a visual cue to say, Kyle, shut the fuck up. And I'm sorry for cursing. There's going to be a lot of those probably today. But like there's something has to tell you the old adage of like, why they have the problem? You're just there to solve it. Just listen. You Degley, my guy.
Degley's here.
God, talk
Uh,
about one of the best human beings in the channel.
no doubt. Dean is here. Let's go get spicy. We're gonna get spicy. Dr. Zoidberg, the one and only. Yes, comments do work here. And we'll throw them on the screen. If you have questions, throw them up on the screen. If you have a spicy topic, dang, throw it up on the screen. Like, even though
Even
I
better.
had some predefined little spicy topics to kind of jump into, I think it's lovely when we can just, take the tangential
So if
routes.
you don't, if you'd allow me to, can I give a little bit of the ethos of where that spicy Monday,
Please,
that
that was
genesis?
thank you for the segue to my first question, which is like, how did this whole Spicy Monday get started? When I asked LinkedIn, what's the importance of Spicy Monday for marketing? The little AI suggested questions. They said, "Oh, it's a great way to create engagement." So aside from the engagement, please tell me how Spicy Monday got started.
So really, like any great idea, Dean and I were at a bar at an event, and we're kind of just talking about like how we do our LinkedIn stuff. And we were on this conversation about what is the stuff that gets said, but everyone's afraid to say. Like, what is the stuff at an event or in MSP echo chambers or that's just in the zeitgeist that everyone seems to kind of like think is passe, or everyone wants to just skirt around the topic or the engagement. Even in the vendor sphere, there's things that we talk about with the in these areas. And it wasn't a clickbait thing. Like at its core, this was not clickbait. This was very much in the genesis of let's bring it out. Let's find a way to make it a discussion. And some of those topics are friendly to us in the vendor space. Some of it's not. Some of it's not friendly in the MSP space, like some of the stuff I posted this week. But the genesis of the idea was let's have conversation about in open these things that we're all thinking about. Let's like right when it comes to the cybersecurity products that are just going to fix all of your issues with a single endpoint, or your stack is some way you can buy your clients' respect and business. Right, these areas that we all have just thought as again, it's not clickbait. It's what we all talk about, but no one wants to put into the ether.
So I think what the thing that I told you backstage that I was going to ask you, that I stopped myself because I wanted to ask you live instead and sort of get a little bit of the organic response to the question is, if whether putting out these posts, just from a personal learning to articulate a thought or idea, is if it's something that you've realized is an important part of your own evolution, is actually writing down your thoughts, getting them organized to make sense when you read them down, the long list of ideas or concepts. Because I find that so many conversations get stuck in just the inability of somebody to communicate what they're trying to say because they haven't tried saying it before. And this goes back even to the days of like sitting in front of a prospect or client at the MSP and being, what is the value that we provide? And if you haven't practiced saying the words or saying the thing, you're going to just look like a fool. And it's really tough to do that unless you sort of do the thought exercise. So I just wanted to ask you that question about what does that mean to you to actually go through the process and the exercise of writing these things down?
My God, can I just say again, you have proven why you are one of the best interviewers in the channel. I
Come
just
on.
want to start that. So you're spot on. And one thing I learned in doing business coaching is the best way to learn something is to have to teach it, because I need to break down the ability to articulate to the least common denominator in a language that everyone can understand. And I know people make fun of me sometimes because my LinkedIn posts are these diatribes of 4,000 words, but really, this is my way of figuring it out. Like this is
Mm.
you know how many times I've written a 400 word LinkedIn post and realized I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, and I'm just going to delete this post because I realized I really didn't know what I was talking
The
about.
stream of consciousness, yeah.
And yeah, right. It is a stream of consciousness in some aspects. And like Robert Chaffee, he loves to send me the text message, the Mark Twain quote of, if something to the effect of like, if I would have wrote you a shorter letter if I'd known the topic better, or if it, right, like some level of
Right.
brevity, really, right? I can't remember the quote off the top of my head. If you do, comment, like check me on this one. But yeah,
I'm
there's a
familiar
lot
with what
of
you're talking about. Yeah, yeah. Without the context, I have to speak to everything. Without
yes,
clarity, I have to speak to everything. Yeah.
totally. And even with how I now format my LinkedIn posts, I do that in a way to where one, I want the reader to see the key topics and the key points, because I have now synthesized my post to a level to where I can just give you 3 bullet points in the middle of the post. And as long as you read those 3 bullet points, I have conveyed what I'm trying to teach you, or I'm trying to convey what I'm trying to say. And no, I am I am so against using LinkedIn's AI features and using GPT to write your LinkedIn posts because we all suck at this. We're all trying to figure out our own way. We're all trying to iterate on past ideas or
Mm,
past concepts. And if I use AI to try to make it better, then I'm not being genuine. I'm not being myself. I am not being vulnerable enough to say maybe I'm wrong. I've made plenty of posts where someone has made some comment that I'm going, you know what? That's actually a better idea. Like my post I did to this week with the time management quote. Um, I can't remember the context really in the comment itself, but rather than saying no time, they said fear of disappointment, fear of leading
mhm.
disappointment. I almost want to look it up because it was so fantastic that they iterated on my own post in my own stream of consciousness that I feel like I know the topic better now.
I like that. And I remember hearing this quote about people don't have ideas, they just catch them as they're kind of
Yeah.
floating by. And I find that those are the interesting, I guess, parallels, connections. You hear something that kind of resonates with you in one way or another. And suddenly it makes sense in this context that you can sort of restate it with another meaning or a different outcome. And I love that, especially going outside of the MSP industry, hearing things that another entirely different industry is doing and somehow how that correlates. I find that super interesting. Apparently, you do put Dean to sleep with your LinkedIn novels, however. And so maybe we'll switch to the spicy rundown. And this is, I kind of just made a little collection of some of the things that I'd heard over the last little while. And a couple of these are off of Dean's YouTube channel as well, because there's a few good ones in there. But this first one, and you were just referring to it, the FOMO plus saying yes equals no time. And I find these are often, maybe projections of what you're going through in that moment and helping to articulate something for somebody in a way that they kind of have their realization and stop the thing that they're doing that they shouldn't be doing. But, talk to me a little bit through this FOMO plus saying yes. I think everybody will recognize and feel that this is something that happens to some extent in everybody's life, but you got to get very, very habitual with your response to it.
Yeah, and none of these are things, by the way, that I'm perfect at. And I hope I convey that a lot of times when I make a post, because I have a ritual every morning, I have my coffee. It's usually 5 a.m., 5:30 a.m. And I drink my coffee and write my LinkedIn post. Like that is part of my process. And days that you see me guys not do a post, that means I probably had to like literally chug my coffee and hop on a call. I also have a 3 month old, so chances are I'm trying to get him ready or something to that effect. But um, FOMO plus no time or saying yes is no time, that came out of my own recollection that I said yes to too many things. And last week I had a post about if from one of my coaching clients basically telling me, Kyle, I don't have time to go and follow up with leads. I don't have time to chase after my next prospect. And it was a retort to that experience. Now, I'll get into it in a second, remind me, but I do want to get into how I catalog some of these ideas because I think that helps a lot of
Mm,
entrepreneurs build these posts and build their own personal brand. But what I found myself is this week, right? It's a short week going, holy shit, I have no time and there's some things that I want to do. And last week I had this idea of, oh, just shorten your meetings. Well, this week I had no time and I had a bunch of 15-minute meetings. So this was my own introspection of why did this happen? And I started to look through my week and I went, sales call, sales call,
mm.
demo, catching up with a friend. Luis wants to ask me to do a podcast last minute. And I was saying yes to all this crap because it sounded fun. And then I looked at next week and and I'm going to be transparent here. I have a couple events I'm going to next week, some MSP events. I'm going to hang out with some amazing people. But I asked the question of, did I need to be there if my two business partners are going to be there? Right. And from an actual business perspective, how is that slowing down empath zone growth
Yeah, enter
if one
FOMO.
of us isn't here? And this is a vulnerable perspective because, yeah, I'm going to have FOMO because my friends are going to be fun. You're going to be sending me, right, selfies on, hey, we're at the bar. You and I did this to Aaron Kennedy. on his way home from his vacation. And what did he do? He got FOMO and showed up at the
Yeah.
hotel like no joke. What was
Yeah.
that? 20
He
minutes later?
literally, his family dropped him off at the hotel on their way home. So he could come hang out with us. And by the way, to speaking to the conference experience, I wish everybody, rather than just post selfies of like what a great time we're having, would take a moment to reflect on, is there something I learned this week, and speak about that. You know, like what is the value you're putting back into the social media feeds of people like that are giving them FOMO for potentially no reason. Like, okay, it sounds like you had some drinks at the bar. What did you learn? Oh, nothing. Maybe I shouldn't have been there. But we don't have that distinguishing capacity, sort of in the quick,
No.
scroll through the vortex of the death scroll.
No, exactly. And we've all been there. We've all done it. We've all gone to events where we're like, why did I go there? And I got COVID at one event where I was like, why did I go there? That we tricked Aaron Kennedy to meet us at. Sorry. But right, like you're totally right. And I even remember doing this at my MSP where I would even lose context of who my audience is. And I think this is the thing that I always try to tell MSPs is when you make these posts, you're making them like I did to other MSPs. Who is your audience? Is your
Yeah,
audience
yeah.
the people that are going to be your prospects? Are they your friends? Are you using LinkedIn like Facebook? I mean, right? It's self-serving. I talk a lot about MSP stuff. Well, guys, MSP is my audience. That's my personal
Yeah, it's your
brand.
target
That's also
prospect. Yeah,
something
yeah.
that yeah, I also get ROI out of you MSPs because right, this is who I love and what I know. And I again, this is spicy topics because a lot of MSP vendors probably wouldn't talk about, I only make posts to sell deals to MSPs, but I also have a personal life. I have friends. I do genuinely love what I do, but there is a world of what is the ROI of all this time that I spend on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
So I don't know if I got to your actual point.
You,
Um,
you always get to the point. I think you're
I
an
think the
expert
point.
at making the point relevant, no matter what you say. Um, so so this is FOMO and saying no. So what is the learning? What is the thing that you found yourself working on specifically, with this challenge of not having time? Because it is an exercise to say no, and you've heard other people. You have to get really good at saying no, and prioritizing and all these things. But it's tough, and it's not. The topic that's on my mind recently around some of these life challenges and evolution of the self is kind of this very all or nothing attitude that we tend to have towards everything all the time. And so when somebody says, "Yeah, I got to start saying no," then suddenly you're just saying no to everything, and it's really tough to find sort of that gray area of struggling well, as Ray Dalio would call it, struggling well and not just poorly struggling, and then or just making this over rotation pivot into the complete opposite of what you thought you needed to do or what you were doing, and then just having a bad outcome or just a undesired consequence or effect on it. And so how are you tweaking?
Uh, so there's so many things that popped in my head when you started talking. Well, I was waiting to talk. I was active listening, but the second you said some things, my brain was already churning on the answer. So if you look at like famous entrepreneurial thought leaders, like a Dan Sullivan, he talks about the four pillars of entrepreneurial freedom. First, it's freedom of cash, right? I don't want a boss. And since I don't want a boss, I got to sell my time in order to get that freedom of salary, right? But what happens? We all oversell our time. So what do we want? The next thing is freedom of time. How do I make the same amount of money but buy my time back, right? That's where we
Mm,
start bringing in employees and we start looking for VAs and assistants. We start increasing our prices, right? Can I sell less hours at more money? But the third and fourth pillar are interesting because it's freedom of choice and freedom of relationships, right? What type of relationships did I build that I now need to relinquish because they're no longer really serving my ability to have freedom? Which allows you then to get to this freedom of choice of I'm going to say yes to the things that I want to do, and it's not going to affect my outcome or my personal wealth or my personal being. And this is where people like Gino Wickman and Vern Harnish came up with these business operating systems with the idea that how can I have other people run my businesses for me? How can I build these frameworks and these standards? And when you ask the question on, well, how are you putting this into play and how do I practice this? I think it's an ever long journey for us business owners and us operators of how do I manage my time? What becomes important that I spend my time on? And none of us are good at it. We're all just students in this. This is like playing the guitar.
Mm,
This is like drawing. This is like painting. Is you're going to fail all the time at managing your time. But are you consciously looking at your week, at your day, at your month, at your quarter and saying, am I spending time on things that are important? Am I spending things on time that actually are currently needs in my business or my personal life? Is this something that's going to compound or is going to accelerate my journey to my goal? Right? Are these accelerators? And when you look at a lot of things, like I'll use one of my MSP clients, I looked at his calendar with them, and he had in 1 week 10 meetings doing demos with vendors. And I had to ask him, why are you on these demos? And he goes, well, because they seem like cool tools. They seem like cool objectives. They seem like they're shiny objects, SOS, shiny
yeah, yeah.
object syndrome, as I call it. And I said, well, is this serving a current need? Well, no, but it might. So you're looking for the need at that point, which tells me you're unclear on the goals that you have for either your business, your team, or your personal life. So I think it's really always putting in front of you of defining what's important, defining what the now needs and what tomorrow is going to be. If you spend time understanding where I'm going, then I can reverse engineer what I should spend my time on. And if I'm ever looking at my week, I've tried to start creating the exercise of why am I doing this meeting and what need is it serving? And if I can't answer those two questions, then I probably have no reason to be wasting my time on it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that maybe part of the human condition of this is that we're always trying to solve for problems we don't have yet. And so one of the things you know this already. I've been reading the Daily Stoic, and the post from August 21st was this post. The concept is don't be miserable in advance, meaning if
That's awesome.
if you're constantly like creating a situation in your mind of what the future state of misery is going to be for your situation, whatever, then you kind of tend to pull yourself away from the things that are a priority or important right now. And I thought that was an interesting way to think about it is, and in the practice of getting better at saying no, I think the daily habit of prioritizing the things that need to happen today. What's important but not urgent. That whole mechanism is super important. You also, I think it's part of one of the other things. But what was the concept that you mentioned in one of the other posts? It was this idea that yeah, it's what I just said. If you don't need this right now, then you need to spend the time understanding what the outcome, the metric, what is the actual benefit of making that change going to be if it's not broken and doesn't need fixing right this second. I forget where I saw that. It was one of your very, very smart
Well,
posts.
and just to go, like I see this comment from Michael, and I love this, but if you see things on your calendar where they're important to the business, but they're not important to you driving goals, right? That's usually a sign that you need to delegate that to somebody. And if I can't delegate it or I feel like I can't delegate it, then that becomes the next important thing because it's becoming a blocker, right? I need to train somebody. I need to put it into a learning management system that might be built for MSPs, right? I need to build out a responsibility. And if I don't have anybody to delegate it to, then I need to grow my business a little bit further to where I have enough cash flow to bring that person on board to take that off my plate.
Dude, first of all, we're obviously not going to get through this list. So let me just switch back to this camera view for a second. So delegation. Let me get into that real quick because one of the things on the list was actually founder mode. Founder mode's been making a whole bunch of noise this week in the
Yeah.
VC circles and Y Combinator, et cetera, et cetera. And when I did the deep dive into that Brian Chesky conversation with Lenny on Lenny's podcast, and then the stuff that was posted on the Y Combinator, Paul Graham posted. I went and found this other thing where Chesky talks about this idea of not delegating understanding. And I thought that was super interesting once I started thinking about it because it's a Charles Eames quote, the designer of the famous Eames chair, and
Oh,
he had this
The thing I got
statement.
right there.
Yeah, yeah. He said, "Don't delegate understanding." And one of the things that we're very quick to do, as we're sort of taught or academically beaten into delegating more of the things inside of our business, so we can get out of the weeds, quote unquote, is that we start delegating stuff. But we do that also with the delegation of the understanding of that thing that you're handing to the person to do. And so oftentimes that person doesn't understand the thing yet. And so let's say you have an ops project where you're kind of moving a system in this with this shiny object syndrome. This is a very common occurrence in the MSP land. And so now you're just, oh, this person's going to be the champion for this. You're going to hand them the project of moving over the system, but they're missing all these first principles and building blocks of the understanding of all the moving parts of the problem and the issue. So yes, you delegated the issue, but now you also delegated the understanding. And so this kind of gets to the crux of the whole founder mode discussion around being in the details is not necessarily micromanaging. Is just if you're the one that understands all the moving parts really well, then that's the thing you need to help people understand better inside of the business. So then they can take on the delegation and have the understanding. Anyway, so that was my tangent on that.
No, and the whole founder thing, I mean, we've talked about it at length in Empath, is our entire thesis from a business go-to-market strategy is founder-led. Like the David Geithart has a fantastic book called Founder Brand. If you haven't read it, to MSP owners, it's fantastic. It is applicable to you because the modern business owner is getting younger, right? You're getting older and you need a way to speak to those younger audiences, not for the business tomorrow, but for that business next year, right? Try to think about prospecting a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. And if you take a page from like Gary Vaynerchuk, right, it's all about content. Where are their eyeballs? Where is their attention? He just released a new book on the new currency is attention or something like that.
Yeah.
Is the new marketplace. And while a lot of it is, I get it. I already know a lot of things he's talking about. The mindset is really about where are people's eyeballs? Where are they looking? Because you need to be in front of that. And you also need to be able to speak in a way to where they want to look at you. You're just not annoying. And, I think there's a lot of confusion, especially when it comes to marketing and PR firms and what all this is. And Dean, you're kind of hitting the nail on the head. This is things that you can't really delegate. You can't really, you have
Right.
to.
You're turning delegation into abdication. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And
Excellent
this
call out.
is, again, and MSPs, I think, and I know this is a spicy statement to make. When we hire a marketing agency or we hire a sales agency, we think that our sales problems will go away. They will deliver us all of the leads. They will make all of the phone calls that will get us all the customers we want. And what do? They abdicate. They walk away. They never create a care. They never create a passion for growing their business. The talk that I did at Exchange, or I've done actually 5 or 6 times this year, is deconstructing growth and actually talking about the growth stages in an MBA. Like what is an MBA out of McKinsey or out of Deloitte actually define growth as? And there's 4 stages. There's hyper growth at 40%. There is fast growth at like 20%. There's normal growth at like 13%. And then I call it dying, anything less than 13%. And when you take these numbers and you think about your business, dying basically means your business has no more value than yesterday. Why? Well, because 13% growth may have just compensated for inflation, cost of living increases, churn, right? It's
There's
literally
actually
just
diminishing
replacing what you
returns.
had.
It's not even staying the same. It's eroding the value. It's eroding, everything.
Yeah, your business is worth less than it was last year, and you put all this effort in there. So there hits a point in your business where you have to be obsessed with the growth of your business.
Yeah.
And that's where the old adage, if you're not growing, you're dying, comes out of, is if you literally try to abdicate some of these functions in your business and delegate and walk away from something like sales, marketing, brand, whatever the topic we're on is now, and I've lost kind of that train of thought. You have to be immersed in it, even if you suck at it.
Yeah, I agree. Henry commented this about efficiency, and I think one of the challenges in just becoming more efficient is that, again, the human condition is if you make time somewhere because you became more efficient in somewhere else, the natural progression of those things is to just fill your calendar with more things. It's not necessarily pulling back from the number of activities. And I think there's an interesting over rotation into trying to do more with the same time. And so we're just filling up the calendar, finding more ways to, tweak 1%, 2%, and then just filling it up with more and more and more. And maybe it's an age condition, but as I get older, I definitely think more about deep thinking and just getting some time to ruminate about ideas or topics or issues or challenges, and not necessarily try to do more. And I stopped defining productivity in my day as the number of things that I did. And it just like it's an equation that's doomed to fail because you're never going to get enough done. Work is always going to be piling up. There's always more to do. And so I think the evolution of the definition is an interesting thing to think about. But that was I don't want to. Let's move on to the next one because I think this is partly related. This idea of best practices, and the spicy post about this was that people tend to come into this industry and here's what everybody else is doing and those are the best practices and we're just going to do that, package, rinse and repeat type of thing. But every business has its own unique conditions, and I think best practices are an interesting baseline, a place to start from, but should not be taken as literally the whole of how you should run your business at any given point because like it's just it does it a disservice, I guess is my point. And if all you're thinking about, and we'll get into this with the does standardization equal commoditization, is that if all you're doing is trying to create more efficiency, then you're just obviously in the race to the bottom. And so pulling out, having deeper conversations, elevating the strategy, et cetera, is important. And best practices doesn't necessarily get you thinking about those things. But your take on best practices and that spicy post.
Oh, yeah. So this actually came out of Sierra Pacific Group as we were building it out, is really this idea that there's a lot of frameworks out there, there's a lot of good ideas, but everyone's a little bit of a snowflake. And I was talking to Amy Luby, which kind of generated this post, and we were making jokes that, right, there's all these master templates for MSPs, but how many of them actually have succeeded with those master
Mm.
templates verbatim? How many have actually came out of those and said, I am 100% to spec and I have 10x to my growth? 1%, half a percent? I would dare to say none of them. And I know only Siths talk in absolutes, but there's a world in which look at cookbooks. What do they say a lot of times? Flavor to taste, salt to taste. Why? Because your ability to digest a practice really is in your stomach to take on risk. And you see this, by the way, all the time in like MSP Geek and Facebook forums and our MSP of what's the best practice for this? How should I do this? And there's never the context of the why. How did I get to this practice? Why did I make the decision to run my help desk this way, or do my lead generation that way, or bake my marketing campaign this way? And it spawns this, well, I just want someone to give me the answer. It makes you afraid to come up with your own version of something and try. I talk a lot about cortisol and flight or flight and the ability as a business owner to try something and fail. I have this personal mantra called Dare to Suck. Came out of an old Aerosmith practice of how they wrote their music. But the idea is that you are going to fail. You are going to trip over your feet. It's all about your ability, though, to stomach how long can we fail so that I have enough data to make an incremental improvement to make, right, to do the salt to taste of this best practice. Right. And I see so often of just give me the template, just tell me how I should do it. Just give me the answer. I've had even this as a business coach, people who tell me, Kyle, stop giving me the it depends answer. Just tell me what you would do.
Right.
And right, my ability to sustain risk is far beyond a lot of others. I know that I literally shit can be burning down. I could be $0 in my bank account and I'm still going to try something just because over the years I've just gotten the stomach for it. And I don't know if I'm hitting the actual point of your overall question here, but it came out of be a little bit different. And it does go into the standardization and commoditization because if we all just work templates, then we're just franchises. And if we're just franchises, we may all just be MSP as our brand name, and we all do it the same way, and we all collect our 10%, measly paychecks and pay a franchise fee.
Yeah, I love Dean's comment here because it's so facetious, but I love it. You know, if it's not like we don't have the playbook already in front of us, it's not like people have not already succeeded doing the things that we're trying to do. Why isn't everybody on the same path to success? Therefore, right? And I love the
Well, and
conversations where I hear people saying, "Oh, you know, if only I could start an MSP all over again, here's how I would do it." And so like, okay, but why aren't you doing that right now if you know that that's what you needed to do? And so my point is that it's always all roads lead to execution, and that's you know something that is not necessarily handed out to you in a paper
well,
flyer.
and I want to I want to make a comment on this a little bit.
Oh, the bat has come out.
So
Careful.
we waste a lot of hot air in the channel, a lot of damn hot air. We ask for the best practice. None of you are actually implementing it. A lot of us are just want to hear. We just want to talk about our problems. We just want to vent, which, by the way, this is fine. There's nothing wrong with, hey, let me interact with my peers and talk about the challenges I'm having. But how many of you are actually creating the discipline in your organization to put the honest cycles into trying these things that we give you advice on? I used to say when I was an EOS coach for a couple of years that, right, results come out of a Venn diagram of not just the strategy that a business framework will give you, but out of the discipline to actually give it effort. How do I hold myself accountable? How do I hold my team accountable? How do I create motivation that creates the discipline of execution?
Hmm.
That's missing 99% of the time. And I see these businesses that would come to me and say, Kyle, I'd implemented EOS or scaling up or whatever. Even some of the MSP frameworks out there that I'm not going to name because they're going to chase after me with, oh, here, I'll call it, right? The C levels, the true methods, those are the two that pop into my brain. But did you actually try it? Did you actually spend the time to follow through with it and check in with your leaders and look at it 90 days after you implement it and said, did it make a change or was the old way better?
Hmm. And to Dougley's comment here, which is so relevant to what you're saying, you know, what is success? Because we often tend to paint like this whole thing as there is a goal line that we're trying to cross. And I can't remember who did this quote. I'll see if I can find it. But the quote was, "You have to love doing it more than having done it." And it was an interesting sort of introspective thing to think about, because if all we're trying to do is like get rid of the work so we can get to this like mystical end line or goal line, then like what was the whole point? And then you get there and then you need more, and then like there's never any fulfillment or any satisfaction. So I thought that was so interesting. You have to love doing it more than having done it.
Well,
Because
this is why I love Degley too, because success is going to be different from everybody. If you said, Kyle, how did you do this at your MSP? Well, we were a hypergrowth MSP. I can tell you right now, you probably wouldn't like the lifestyle I had when we hypergrew. And I know everyone gets afraid of the word lifestyle, but there's nothing wrong with it, in my opinion, because what other business is out there that can make possibly 20 to 25% on the bottom line forever with recurring revenue?
yeah,
You
everybody
can live a
wants the
badass lifestyle.
everybody wants the outcome, but nobody wants the work.
No, but here's the thing is like I would have MSP say, Kyle, can you help me model hyper growth? And I would show it to them and I would show them what the lead generation looks like. And I'm like, and are you going to do this? And they'd be like, oh shit, no, it's too much work. And I caution MSPs to get caught into the trap of you think that you have to sell your business. And here's a spicy take. I don't think all MSPs have to exit. I think there's not enough conversation about succession planning in our channel. I think everyone now has bitten this apple that they have to sell their MSP. And if you go look at some other verticals like the voice vertical or the copy dealer network, they have a lot of succession. And what's beautiful about succession, I can pocket part of that profitability for the rest of my life if I succeed it correctly or if I do an ESOP model.
Yeah.
I don't always have to sell to private equity. And a lot of MSPs that I've talked to that have sold to private equity, they didn't get the value that they thought they were going to get. They're now looking for jobs as MSP owners. And this kills me,
Yeah.
right? This kills me. And honestly, this hurts my soul a little bit because you had a business that had the potential to make you a lifestyle for a lot longer than what your exit probably was, because you didn't think about capital gains. You didn't think about holding a note. You didn't think about add backs. You didn't think, no. And then you go, well, no one told me. Well, I'm telling you now, if you run your business correctly, then yes, you can have someone run it for you. And yes, you can have enough to retire on.
I like this question from Henry because he's saying, I'm always cautious of people who preach from ivory towers without relevant and timely experience. And it's interesting that if we put ourselves at the bottom of that equation as MSPs, think of let's say we're a 30-person shop and we're talking to a 250-person client. How do you think they feel about the ivory tower that we're spewing our technical stuff from, when we have never been anywhere near to running a 250 person business that they would feel, you know, makes our views meaningful from that same perspective? And so I will make this comment just to be spicy with Henry, and is that I think the challenge with not taking advice from people who haven't done it is when we tend to over rotate into that advice and not simply use it as a curiosity or thing that you take home and think about, because maybe it's an interesting idea. And again, to go to the Stoicism teachings, the only thing that you have to go to that you own truly yourself is your reasoned choice. And so if part of the decision here is to take somebody's advice and not have your reasoned choice around it, then yes, of course you have to be cautious with advice, given from the ivory towers. But that doesn't mean the advice wasn't necessarily good. And sometimes people have a completely different perspective from a different industry or whatever. It doesn't mean that they've necessarily run a large business. They may have worked with a bunch of large businesses and have that perspective. And so, although you're right, Henry, I think this is a very, very broad stroke comment to make, because there's a ton of really, really useful advice from people that haven't necessarily done it. And so I appreciate that you worked the word cautious into there and not made it.
Well, and I want to empower Henry a little bit here, because I'm sure that you could read between the lines on here. This is what Spicy Monday was for. If there's something that needs to be said about one of these comments, then check us. Like if there's something I said that you're like, Kyle, you don't know what you're talking about. Like I want to hear that, right? That allows us to have conversation. I think so often we think of it as combativeness, but the idea of debate was, let's hear all the ideas that are out there. Let's hear different perspectives. And this goes back to the best practice thing, by the way. Some of those best practices out there came from very small MSPs.
I'm gonna jump to this one, mastery versus ego, because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about right now. There's this podcast I listen to regularly, and it's Shane Parrish, and it's called The Knowledge Project, and it's brings some really interesting guests, people that are experts in their field and stuff like that.
You're giving me a bunch of reading and podcasts to listen to.
And Shane brought this person on, Dr. Gio Valiante, and they were having this really interesting discussion about mastery versus ego. And I think in our industry, it's hyper relevant, because what he said was, when mastery oriented people fail, the reaction is curiosity. When ego oriented people fail, they feel embarrassment. And so then he goes on to explain that a mastery orientation is, okay, I'm curious about that. I love the work of the practice, love being in it and doing that. It's inherently interesting, whatever failure or situation that happened. And then the ego orientation on the flip side of that is, I need to prove something. I need to beat others at it. I need to be first. I need to show off and prove myself for whatever reason. And so I thought that was interesting, because this is definitely an evolution of the self for anybody that is thinking about this on purpose. And I think we tend to have this lemming effect in our industry too. And when somebody, jumps into the conversation on LinkedIn about whatever, or on Reddit or whatever, then everybody just jumps in. And I love this other quote that I heard: you always have the option of keeping your opinion to yourself. You don't have to always jump in and say something, because in most cases, people haven't spent the time articulating that thought, and however they say it is not going to come out particularly smart, and potentially, fires back on you. But your comment on mastery versus ego, given those couple of observations.
When you were talking, I was trying to think back, like what times have I been egotistical? What times have I gone for mastery in my life? And I think it's a spectrum. I don't know if this is a 1 or 0 scenario. I think this might be a gradient, because there's moments where, right, we even get feedback at Empath. Kyle, this doesn't do this compared to that. And Your gut reaction is you want to tell them that they're wrong, right? You want to say, no, but we designed it perfectly. And that's the ego coming out, right? But then there's those moments where you kind of step back and you know what, even though we thought we were right, there's something that I need to stop and go, okay, what really is in there? And I think that's where you start to kind of balance the line. And when you look at true mastery, if you ever read about sword makers and any of the Eastern approaches to obsessing about your craft, right? They have the idea of 10,000 hours, right? You got to spend 10,000 hours on it to become proficient. And what things have I spent 10,000 hours on and I still suck? Guitar. I've spent probably 100,000 hours on playing guitar in my life. Right now, if I picked it up, oh man, it would be horrible because the last 2 years I've been obsessed about growing my business. I have actually de escalated my ability to be the master because what? I didn't put my reps in, I didn't go back
Yeah.
into it. And it's something that I know I will never be a master of. And that's humbling, right? Do some, and this is where I got really into endurance sports. So I ran an Ironman in 2018. Why? Because I wanted to see, could I get myself to do it? Could I get myself into the mental challenges? Could I get myself into the state of honestly just being mediocre at something? And what would that do? Um, and I've probably gone way in left field at this point on this topic of mastery versus ego. But when you were mentioning ego, and please maybe restate this a little bit. Give me the example again on what you said. How would you describe ego?
Ego is when ego-oriented people fail, they feel embarrassment, as opposed to curiosity, which is the mastery orientation, is to feel curiosity, interest, and yeah, as opposed to just embarrassment.
So that's interesting. Ego as embarrassment. Huh. I guess I would have to wonder, like, what does embarrassment feel like? Because I feel like I've gotten to this place in my career where I'm always just kind of being vulnerable and transparent. And huh, I don't know if I have it. I got to think through that one a little bit, Luis. I got to
Yeah.
be honest. I'm struggling. You have stumped me. Like so, one, congrats. You have stumped me on an answer. But
I
two,
well, this is I think gets to the point of this other one, which is the communication burden, right? Because I think this is exactly what happens. Is I have spent time thinking about that, and suddenly I communicated something that was perfectly clear in my mind. I understood, all of the nuances of the consequence of the statement, but it's new information to you, and so we haven't had the opportunity to properly communicate. This is actually one of Dean's posts. The communication burden is really on the communicator to make the points clearly, so that people that are listening understand. It's never, but it's an interesting challenge how many people take the approach or the stance that, oh, you don't get it, then the problem is with you, obviously. And so, as a communicator, which you are, and a great one at that, comment on this communication burden, because this is, I think, partly why you go through a very, very specific format in your posts to get your ideas out clearly. And kind of the reason why I asked you that initial question of like, does this represent an exercise to you of articulating your thought more clearly, and when do you know that it makes sense potentially to others? Like those are challenges that I think everybody has with communication in general.
well, and it kind of pairs well with Henry. Thank you for clarifying. And by the way, homie, I'm good friends with Henry, so I know he wasn't pointing the finger at us. I just want to state that, but just more of like that was the genesis of Spicy Monday. Is what's funny is when I started formatting my LinkedIn posts a certain way, I started to think back on how I used to write emails to a board or a CEO because I recognized early on they would read the first line and then they would skim the rest. And if I was able to put things into bullet points, or if I was able only to get myself across in 3 sentences or 12 words or less, my email would get read and my point would come across. So it was this whole journey of honestly being heard, because one thing in my career, I was always the youngest. I was always the youngest of a team. Even though I might have managed a bunch of people, they were all twice my age in a lot of cases. When I was 16, and they handed me a Geek Squad department and there was 30 people in that store, they were all twice my age and in all aspects smarter than me. So I had to figure out mechanisms to hold people accountable, but communicate with them in a way that would motivate them to do what I asked them without just saying, do as I say, because I know better,
Yeah.
which a lot of people rely on. I see a lot of business owners think that just because they said it, it should happen. It's the Simon Sinek start with why. And when I was getting preparing for my PhD program, because I wanted to go to school to be a psychiatrist, um, right? You write articles in a certain way, right? They always talk in grade school, right? Concrete detail and then do your comment. Concrete detail, do your comment, and you have APA formatting. Now cite your source. Well, why do they do that? They do that because you want to be able to show that this isn't just you. This isn't just your thoughts or your analysis. I need to be able to say, I read this. I don't want to look like I'm the smartest person in the room because there's going to be a point where I'm going to kind of call BS, kind of like what Henry Tim is saying with best practices, right?
Yeah.
Of I need the ability to say, okay, this isn't just Kyle saying this. This is, Dean tagging along or Louis talking along, or Kyle found a research article that he linked in the comments that backed up these claims. And um, it's really more about the communication and the knowledge share than it is the going now, I guess, kind of the ego perspective, but not in your context. But I'm not just trying to look like the smartest in the room. I'm just trying to say, hey, this came up and here's what we talked about. And this is the potential solve that we saw for this problem. How have you guys solved it? Is there
Yeah.
another perspective that I'm not seeing? Um, I don't know
It,
if I'm drawing lines here.
no, I think it's relevant and important. One of the other podcasts that I follow is Robert Glazer's Friday Forward. Well, Friday Forward is an email that he started writing internally at his company. And it was kind of his musings, his ruminations on a weekly basis. And he found that that was extremely powerful for the company to like plug into his stream of consciousness and what he's thinking about. And this is, again, my point to how abstract our efforts at communicating sometimes are, is because we're in our own head with our thoughts and we're not necessarily out there trying to help other people make sense of them. And to stop and write about it, to stop and think about it, is a really great way to organize those thoughts and get them into some kind of digestible format where people can start to see a bit of the line of thinking, what it is that you're trying to say, the reading between the lines and so on. All those things are important.
Well, and this is, by the way, for people that are trying to get better at social media engagement to have these conversations. I even think about this with the images or the videos I post, right? Like some of the images I create, yeah, they're memes. I do them in image flip and it takes me 3 seconds on my phone. Why? Because sometimes I can do with a meme that would have taken me 4,000 words. I did one a couple weeks ago about MSP and this idea of doing AI for your help desk and taking the humanity out of services.
I remember seeing that
It
one.
got like it got like 15,000 impressions like in the first 3 days. One of my fastest just blown up posts. Why? Well, because you didn't have to read the 4,000 words in the post. I was able to synthesize it into a single image.
Hmm.
So I think there becomes even, and I think what I'm doing, I'm discovering this as I'm talking it out loud. If I can say it with an image, and it hits that hard, then I really do have an understanding of this, or the community really gravitated towards that idea. And for MSPs, right, this is your way of testing marketing strategies too. If that hit, and I knew that hit, do more of those posts, right? Like go
Yeah.
back and say, maybe that's what I should use for an ad. Maybe that's an idea for a webinar I can do for my audience. Maybe that's something I could do for a seminar or my chambers events because it instantly hit with my audience. Like they
It's,
went, I get that.
I'll tell you though, Kyle, although it's an honorable sentiment, I think it's really difficult for MSPs to get out of the language of the MSP to go and do
Yeah.
something entirely different for their customers. And so this is why it's so interesting that we have the same language, and as vendors, we're communicating in the same language. but you have to reinvent your communication when you're going out there, and you have to know the language of the customer so well. You have to be in so
Yes.
many of the details of how their business works. And this is one of the things that was in one of your other posts where with Alex, where you were talking about, how does the client make money, and understanding the building blocks of every part of their business is the only way that you can understand where technology can potentially have a good impact to drive them to better outcomes, and not what this conversation about the standardization is, which is kind of, I'll segue into this since we're talking about it now, is this idea that we're so hyper focused on standardization and efficiency. And I think those are all great things. However, it becomes a problem when this standardization, all it's doing is just helping you get to the bottom, the race to the bottom faster. And so one of the interesting challenges, and I've heard so many people talking about this in the last couple of days, Peter Melby, who's now CEO of New Charter, the big roll up, was talking about this. We have to get away from using our IT skills to solve IT problems, and getting better on understanding customers' problems to deliver business outcomes. And so this is the whole rotation we're seeing back to quote unquote consulting and consultative discussions and strategic things. And all these things are obviously enabled by compliance or whatever other frameworks you want to throw at to give you some semblance of structure in that conversation. But you spent a lot of time growing a very fast MSP. You can either do a lot of the same commoditized thing faster, and you're going to eventually hit a glass ceiling, or you can start to evolve out of that conversation into things that are truly delivering business value, where it breaks the ceiling of what you charge for IT, because it's no longer, this commodity price that is defined by the market, right? And so your comments, your thoughts on this.
And it also goes back to this whole best practices conversation. So the whole idea of a stack and standardization, as I recall back in 2009, 2008, as I started to understand this MSP concept, is the MBA definition of economy of scale, meaning as my revenue goes up, my costs go down, right? The whole idea that I am going to standardize everything is because I want to build efficiencies. I want to increase my profitability of my product. That's why we do it at its essence. But if you look in things like manufacturing, that only really happens when I'm producing massive quantities, like millions and millions and millions of quantities, is where economy of scale actually starts to have an ROI. And right, a lot of people think I'm anti-automation and anti all of AI and everything. Well, no, it's
You're
more of I don't
anti
have the
it being
business
everything
case.
in the business is what it is.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Well, it's not having the business objective. I don't know what I'm trying to automate to save what type of money, and I'm not going through the practice of if I spend $10,000 in automation, is that going to make me $10,001 of profitability?
Well, and the challenge is that all those things are about the MSP. It's not about the customer
Yes,
anymore. And
and
so, and
and
it's
that's where I
interesting.
was getting to.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, no, and that's where I was getting to. And I'm sorry to cut you off. That was extremely rude of me. But we make these things in a bubble that's good for me. It's self-serving. And I was talking to a good friend. He runs a lot of account managers, and I told him that you want to know how your account managers are doing a good job? Go interview all of them. Go through every one of their clients and ask them how do they make money.
Yeah, yeah.
If your account managers
Dude,
do not know how your client makes money, they're not doing their job.
I had a 4 hour conversation on literally just this topic with a couple of great MSPs out of Florida last week, Rob Gunling and Guido Garcia, and it was so insightful. And we were there with somebody who does account management for an MSP, and the whole time it was an interesting struggle between go ask more questions and oh, but how do I price that? And so there's this like very, very strong rubber band, like almost muscle memory to want to try and fit it into this like thing that we just go and repeat and standardize and commoditize and bring the value down ultimately, as opposed to, use the standardization as a baseline to create value. And anyways, like this is not, we're not going to solve this here. It's an interesting thing for people to
No.
take home and think about because Kate is making the comment like you have to become a chameleon to your clients, but this comes through simple curiosities. Like an account manager, if all they're trying to do is find another product from your stack to sell to the customer, you're missing the opportunity. You're missing the whole point of like delivering value to the client. You're just, scratching an itch or solving for a very specific pain that fit within the framework of the thing that you packaged and priced for standardization. It's not necessarily doing anything for the client. A couple weeks ago, I had Chris Jensen, who's a CIO in the enterprise, and he regularly works with MSPs, but he's the guy working with the 50 million plus businesses on some interesting conversations. One of the things he talked about is one of his clients was switching MSPs, and he gives this quote of like, yeah, the MSP came in and said they were going to do this, and this was the solution they're going to put in, this was the timeline, and this XYZ, and you're going to like it. And the client calls the Chris after the meeting, be like, these guys, what's going on here? This is not how we work. They said they were going to do all these things. They don't know the first thing about our business. Ironically, you probably end up doing the same things if you had the conversation first, but there's so much importance in getting the buy-in from the client and understanding, where, if these things actually are going to solve for the true need and the true opportunity.
Well, and then you have no ground to stand on. If you make a recommendation, I can't say, Mr. Client, I am recommending this because it's going to make your sales guys 10% faster, or your operators 20% more efficient, and therefore you will hit your business objectives. Like, there's a whole topic on VCIO that's built into here, and I could bring in some Chris Ryan stuff that him and I have talked about. But
I like Alex's comment about VCIO. The state of VCIO today is lipstick on account management. Is the way he puts it. And I love that characterization because it's so true. And we're just not getting out of that very, very standardized, focused, or standardization.
Oh, we could do an entire call on the problem with VCIO. And
let's get that on the schedule. But we're at the top of the hour. I have one more thing to talk about. Maybe we've kind of touched on all these things in one way or another, but it's this idea of the illusion of knowledge. And I think this is of particular interest in the MSP industry, because one of the things that I find is that as we come across things that we don't know or a problem we're trying to solve, we tend to try and interject the learning in the process of the moment. And I think that's valuable. Who's the best IT support technician? The one that can Google the best. And that's great. But I think there's this idea that the worst time to look for information is when you actually need it, because what happens is we end up with the illusion of knowledge. And I think this is so important when we try to then connect to the elevated conversations we're trying to have with clients. If all we're doing is like Googling a solution to this problem and we can churn through tickets very quickly, sure, that's valuable. But again, that's the commoditization of what MSPs do in the end. And so will that ultimately deliver growth for you in the long term? Absolutely not. You're going to hit, this is why MSPs get stuck at, $2 million or $3 million, and they seem to be doing everything right. We've adopted best practices. We're standardized. Our stack is great, but none of these things seem to sort of get them to cross the chasm to the other side of what it is, that potential for growth. But your thoughts on the illusion of knowledge of somebody who I know to be very curious about the world and life and thoughts and ideas. How do you think about
and this is going to sound horrible, man, but this is literally the genesis of where empath ultimately came from. It's this idea that right now MSPs have to rely on either hiring unicorns or people that are just going to fail their way either out the door or up the ladder. And the current mechanisms that we've recognized is we spend so much time learning as business owners, as MSP owners, but how often are we taking that knowledge, going back to our teams, and then delineating that from the event or conference that I took, or the peer group that I have? And why? Well, because we don't have time. Like, at the end of the day, we don't have time to do this. So you were talking about thought cycles and having time to really think through an idea. Well, thinking about an employee's journey and their quest for knowledge and education and continuous education, it can't be the recency effect, as they'd call it in psychology, which is, and I'm guilty of this at my MSP, which is we brought on a client that went and bought Azure, and none of my employees knew how to use Azure. So what did I say? Someone go get Azure certified. Well, the question I didn't ask is how many of our customers actually use Azure? How many clients?
I have a different term for this. I call it the VAR baggage. We wait till a client raises their hand with a need, and then we go figure out how to sell it to them and get a few points of margin. And this is a bit of the attitude that's happening towards compliance. And it's not going to work because you got to be much deeper into the moving parts of compliance to understand how to do it well for your clients. It's not something that you turn on, the faucet to sell to you give your account managers like, go sell compliance to all our customers. I would hate for that to be the point, the place where we
Well, and
end up
what
on.
is selling compliance is a whole other conversation, right? Like,
Yeah.
eh, I'm really good friends, and in
Let's
full
not
disclosure, right?
jump into that one, because I think
Yeah, sorry.
your point about the knowledge piece is so important. I love what you guys are working on with Empath, because I think it is important, and a lot of something that you guys talk a bunch about during just the overall conversation of Empath in the market is this idea of accountability. Talk to me a little bit about the intrinsic link that exists between education and accountability, and how do you articulate this for somebody who like maybe feels a little bit of value in their people, learning, being certified, etc. And maybe certification is not the pivotal thing here, but specifically the continuous learning mindset. Connect that
Yeah.
to accountability for me.
So our Jim Collins BHAG, right? The idea of it takes 100 years to figure something out is how do we make education accountable? Like that is the big picture of what we're trying to build through iterative improvement at Impact. And the context here is I at my MSP bought everybody a learning product that was very expensive. And what I would always find is no one would use it. No one learned anything. No one was getting better at the components that would drive our business. It just didn't happen. Like they know how to build a server in a lab, but they still can't add a user to the Active Directory of my client because it's so customized that I could never learn it from a training mechanism. So the idea is how do we build enablement that allows a business to not only create training and have training for someone to take, but how do I then hold them accountable to not only taking it, but digesting it? And that digestment is a whole different process because I can't just binge it. Research shows if I watch 4 hours of educational videos, I'm probably only going to remember the first 3 minutes of that one video, right? My brain switches to entertainment mode, not learning mode. So, how do we build mechanisms in a platform that allows someone to eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? That's where our elephant mascot actually came out of, and build features in a software that say, hey, no, you can't watch any more videos. Hey, this test is coming out of the transcript of that video that we have created. Or I'm going to go put a ticket on your PSA that says, here's when you're allowed to go watch that video. So the idea that I don't have time to watch education because the printer just broke at Acme Co. It isn't there. My calendar is blocked off. And then going full circle, how does my manager accountable to me to build me a learning pathway that will help me with my career? So the accountability is two ways. It's not just for the employee, it's for their leader who is supposed to lead them to further places in their career path.
Hmm.
So that's where we spend a lot of times talking about what the learning pathway for any employee in an MSP looks like. But beyond that, what are the tools that the manager has to make that employee not just accountable, but successful?
I love it. And a excellent point to end our broadcast today with is that Kyle loves AI, slaps the AI sticker on everything, and that's it. That summarizes every point succinctly and gets the communication across.
I need that
Obviously,
as a screenshot. I got to screenshot this. That is fantastic.
go for it. You can get it off the
But
recording
anyway,
later too.
yep.
Thanks everybody for jumping in today and participating. I think it was great discussion. I think there's many of these maybe topics that warrant sort of a conversation, an exploration, a thought experiment around. I don't feel like we came here to solve any of these things, by the way, in case that was perceived as part of the objective. I'm just curious, genuinely curious about some of these things and how we're trying to get more out of our own practice of being a human, a person in this industry, and so on and so on. Degley had made this comment a little bit earlier when we were talking about the conversation with clients and this idea of stop going in with the mindset of how much money you're going to make and how fast, going with the true intent of helping your clients. And this speaks so succinctly also to the pathway for education Like if all we're seeing our people as is resources that we were trying to maximize their output of, then I think we're missing the point. You know,
The
there's
fallacy of a ticket kill ratio.
yes, yeah. Speaking of KPIs, yeah, indeed, good stuff, Kyle, dude. Always great to chat with you. Hope we can do this one again. Next time I see a FOMO post is when I'll ping you about doing another live stream,
Okay.
because it seems
One
like
will be
that's the
queued up
one thing you
tomorrow.
can't say no to. And we'll
Oh
have
man, this
a
has been fun though.
follow up conversation. Yeah, thanks to everybody for jumping in. Harry, good comments. Alex, Dagley, who
Bagley,
else was on here? Kate, Dean.
Dean.
Boy, lots of good comments. I love that these stick around also on the LinkedIn video, because even though they're kind of out of the context of the conversation in that moment, I think some good comments in there, sort of with additional thought ideas. So,
Totally.
Mr. Kyle, thank you so much. We'll see you at the next chance. Hopefully, not too far from now.
Right on, guys. Thank you for having me.
Everybody else, we're here every Friday, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Catch us on MSPConfidential.com or on the ScalePad YouTube channel, or on a LinkedIn profile page near you.